As usual, I take only 2 minutes to introduce our key speaker today, who we have the pleasure to have with us Professor Patricia-García Duran, who is a full professor of the Department of Economic History, Institutions and Policy and World Economy at the University of Barcelona. As an economist, she has widely worked on trade policy, and correct me if I'm wrong, Patricia, but always from a non-exclusive economic angle, right? You have always considered this this approach to the trade, to the global trade policy from a more institutionally based focus, if I may. Back in time in 2017 and 2018, for instance, she intensively worked on the TTIP, which helps us to connect this session with our very first session in this course. And then he looked at the impact, at the institutional impact of this key free trade agreement with the US. Afterwards, he has been working on the evolution of this of the European common trade policy from different angles. And for instance, last year he published as co-editor a wonderful special issue that was entitled "Politicization of the EU Trade Policy Across Time and Space" with 2 other colleagues. I do want to emphasize that she's always ready to work with political scientists, which is always good. I mean, I'm just kidding, but I think it's a wonderful combination. This approach, this effort to deal with the trade policy from a wider perspective, and for all these reasons, she's a wonderful key speaker to round up this course on the new trends on the global trade policy. So, Patricia, welcome, and thank you very much for accepting to be with us today.
It is my pleasure. Even if you don't mind, I will have to say that I'm not full professor yet. Yes, okay. I'm just a professor, and some economists will not longer consider me an economist because I'm so interdisciplinary that perhaps it will be better to say, as you have said, institutionalist. It's a good way of putting it, or specialized in international economic relations. Perhaps that would be the best way to more than an economist, because I'm, as you have said, I've tended to look at the wider perspective. So thank you very much. It is my pleasure to be here.
No, thank you for accepting, and thank you for correcting me. Patricia, just to break, just as an icebreaker, just to start with our debate, our discussion today. And before that, people remember that you are more than invited to join in and to bring to the discussion table the questions or doubts or thoughts you want. Okay, you preferably use the chat so that we can arrange the floors, but do not hesitate, please. This is a multilateral discussion. Patricia, as said, you have intensively worked on research on the EU trade policy, right? In recent years, we were increasingly hearing to talk about the common trade policy. Why the EU common trade policy, right? My opinion is that we may observe a radical change. 20 years ago, nobody talked about the EU trade policy, at least in the way we do today. So, first and foremost, why do you think that the trade policy became so important, so salient in today's debate?
I totally agree with you that trade policy was considered a very technical policy, and therefore it did let's put it like that. It was on the focus of certain interest groups, basically labor unions and business interest groups, but not the object of so much attention by the public or by civil society organizations, which is the shift that has occurred. And the reason why that has happened has been quite studied in the literature, of course, by me and by all my other colleagues, because of course it has been a change, and as you know, we tend to study changes and why they occur. So we have basically identified 3 factors behind this new salience of European Union, of European Union trade policy. And the first one is probably the new role of civil society organizations. And these may be due to 2 factors per se, which are, on the one hand, the new technologies that allow the civil society organizations to reach the public in a different way than before. And the second, probably, the fall of the Berlin Wall. Because when you had after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the fall as well of the Soviet Union, what you have is that, let's put it like that, civil society organizations from the left are looked at in a different way. So they have more legitimacy today than they had before. Let's put it like that. So this combination of new technologies and the new legitimacy of certain civil society organizations help them to be able to have a larger impact when contesting European Union trade policy. But why did he start contesting European Union trade policy? The second identified factor that explains the shift in the salience of European Union trade policy is trade. So let me ask somebody from the public, if I may. Marina, you were here from the beginning. Why do you think that trade is no longer the same as 20 years ago? What has changed when we talk about trade? Can you guess? Do you have any idea? Marina Verdes y Marsol? What has changed? Is trade considered the same? When we talk about trade, are we talking about the same issues as 20 years ago? I know that you were not born 20 years ago, but anyway, can you think of trade changing, what we understand by trade?
She has answered through the chat.
Yes, I think globalization and dependence between countries. Very good. Yes, exactly. Basically, what we understand by trade has been enlarged. Stronger interconnection and interdependence between countries. Exactly. There is this concept of interdependence, but from a more technical perspective, what we have is that the interests on trade policy have actually changed the merge of political and non-political interests. Exactly. Very good. And what trade is, or let's put it like that, what trade was at the beginning was just talking about tariffs and quotas. And if you want, customs controls procedures. Is that the main focus of trade negotiations today in this interdependent world? What do you think? Not anymore. Yes, Francesca. What is the focus now? Very good. Digitalization is one of the main focus today. Absolutely, Anna. Yes. And when we talk about digitalization, we are talking about something that is not directly related with on-the-border barriers, with tariffs and quotas. But we are talking about behind-the-border barriers. We're talking about regulations. We are talking about standards. Yes? And this enlargement of trade, let's put it like that, these new trade areas are considered to be one of the explanations of why the salience of trade policy has changed. In what sense? When the focus was on tariffs and quotas, the focus was also on the redistribution of trade, on whether trade was going to be favorable or not for jobs. And the main discussion was between the authorities, business interests, and labor unions. But when we are talking about standards, when we are talking about regulations, when we are talking, for example, which was one of the issues I'm sure you have heard about when you were discussing TTIP, when you talk about whether a chicken that has been cleaned the US way, the chlorinated chicken, could enter into the European Union, we were talking about whether the hygiene standards of the US were the same as the hygiene standards of the European Union regarding chicken. So when you are discussing regulations or requirements, quality requirements, safety requirements, food requirements, what happens is that the public sees something that is going to affect it. It's no longer whether you are in favor of free trade or not. It becomes whether you are in favor of accepting not European Union, but US way or norms regarding chicken standards or chicken hygiene. And this is a big change, because here we are talking about which are the exigence the European Union has already achieved regarding requirements on the safety of products compared with exigencies in other countries. And here is where we start looking at whether the fact that you are negotiating these kind of requirements with Japan, with Singapore, with Mexico, with the US, is going to affect the requirements we have in the European Union. Very interestingly, these kind of requirements had already been on the table since the Korean agreement that I know that you have discussed before. The Korean agreement was one of the deep integration agreements, probably the first deep integration agreement of the European Union with the third country, where these kind of issues were already included in the provisions of the agreement. And since then, we have negotiated, or all the agreements the European Union has negotiated has included these provisions, this type of provisions that have to do with behind the border barriers. And there had not been any public outcry about them. So some of us consider that this factor, the factor that trade is no longer just on the border, but also behind the border issues, is a necessary factor, but not a sufficient one to explain the salience of European Union trade policy among the mass public. So to explain the salience of European Union trade policy, Very good. Yes, Nadia. Nadia is saying people is more concerned about environmental issues and regarding acceptance of regulations, food standards considerations. European Union citizens are speaking up, and this was not a big thing before. That's why the big change happens behind the border laws. Very good. Exactly. This is one of the issues. But what I'm trying to say is that, so we have the civil society organization having a wider say, yeah, right? And they become interested in trade because trade affects behind the border, as Nadia has very well summarized. But those are just necessary conditions. Why? Because we have had other agreements with Korea, with Japan, with Singapore, with Vietnam, with others, without having any kind of public outcry. So something else should be added to understand why there has been this outcry, what has been called the politicization of European Union trade policy. Can you guess which is this third factor? When did we have this outcry? With which agreement? When negotiating with whom? Very good, Jangaleb. Exactly. So the third factor, understand the salience and the politicization of European Union trade policy, has been the negotiations with the US that started in 2013. At that moment, the negotiations with Canada were almost finished. Despite that, the salience of European Union trade policy, the politicization around European Union trade, around the TTIP, had a contagious effect upon the ratification of CETA. So the agreement between the European Union and Canada called CETA, all right? So we have had that this public mobilization against a trade agreement was against the negotiations with the US. Why? Why there was no problem when negotiating with Canada, when negotiating with Japan? But there was when negotiating with the US. Can you guess? What has the US that Japan does not? Or Canada does not, or Vietnam does not, or Korea does not? Very good, Gianmarco. Yes, but all sensible sectors were on the table. Agriculture was on the table for all those agreements, but that's a very good try. Yes, there were sensible sectors, agriculture. And food is very important in European Union. Our standards on food are considered one of the best. Different economic implications. Exactly, very good. In what sense? The fact is that when the European Union negotiates agreement with partners that are not considered to have the same bargaining power, the public is not concerned about the Commission or about the European Union accepting lowering our standards, our requirements on food, for example. But that was different with the US. The perception is that the US has more bargaining power than the European Union. And the US is also perceived as being a neoliberal entity. Therefore, what the CEOs used as arguments to make the issue salient was that if we were to sign the TTIP, we were going to have to accept lower requirements, lower standards. And therefore, that an agreement with the US was going to be against the values of the European Union and even against our democracy, because an agreement with the US would imply that our institutions would have been constrained when deciding on our standards, on our requirements. That's a very good point, Andrea. Yes, we are dependent from US economy. But the US economy is as dependent from the European Union economy as we are. They have a deficit with us in trade. So we are interdependent. Basically, 50% of the investment stock in the US is from European Union investors and vice versa. And for trade is the same. It's our main partner and we are their main partner. So yes, we are very interdependent. But we also consider them to have more bargaining power. And of course, that was a change from before. So, to answer your question, Joanne, which are the three factors? Or why did we have this new salience of European Union trade policy? Because of those three factors, the civil society organizations' new role and new technologies that allow them to reach the public in an easier way. The fact that when we are negotiating trade, we are no longer just talking about tariffs and quotas. And third, the fact that we were negotiating with a partner that we considered to have more bargaining power. These are the three factors identified by the literature. So if you are not in this trade network, you lose in global trade. Example, Africa. That's a very good point, Andrea. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you, Patricia. I cannot agree more with you on this perspective. However, I was considering.
Joanne, there is Marina that is asking if she can ask a question. I suppose it has to do with this one. How come the US has the same reach for information research regarding some chemicals, for example, in food that can be harmful? That's an excellent question. Excellent. This is somehow cultural. Very good. Yes, it has to do with the prevention. From the US perspective, if there is no scientific evidence against something, that means that you can use it. In the European Union way of looking at it, if you don't have enough evidence against something, but you also do not have enough evidence in favor of something, it's better not to use it. So it's better to be cautious. So our way of looking at chemicals is from a cautious perspective. From the US perspective is, okay, if there is no evidence of negative effects, we can use it until we have the evidence of negative effect. And the European Union is, no, we don't have to have evidence of negative effects. Until we have evidence of positive effects or not negative effects, then we will accept those chemicals. Excellent question.
And
when you talk about politicization, it also depends on the different trade agreements. When you talk about politicization, it also depends on the different trade agreements, which leads us to have higher polarization. That's excellent question. Very good. If we were to, of course, when we were negotiating with the US, we were negotiating a deep free trade area agreement. What we have negotiated with China has to do just for investment. If we were negotiating a free trade area with China, probably we will have the same reaction as with the TTIP, in the sense that the public, it will be very salient. It will be an agreement that will be very salient. Because we are starting to consider China another power with equal or more bargaining power. That's a very good point. Absolutely. Sorry, Joanne.
No, please don't be. Actually, it was in relation to this perspective on China. If I am not wrong, the current High Representative of the Union, Mr. Josep Borrell, announced some months ago that the China was the new systemic rival. It's the new system, and this of the European Union, right? And of course, this created like not a diplomatic debate, but at least Josep Borrell need to reconsider or re-explain what he meant by this idea of systemic rival. Thank you very much, Patricia. While hearing to you, I was considering I've never heard a better explanation on the principle of caution that the European Union uses in considering the goods and services that are produced or marketed in the European Union in the single market, right? So make sure that I will refer to you, but I will reproduce your explanations. More things on that, and just before moving on. You mentioned three elements, right? This new role of the civil society organizations, the change in global trade itself, and also this really radical new actor with whom the European Union started to negotiate in the mid 20s, which was the United States.
The United States.
Don't you think that we should add a fourth element, which is the institutional change that occurred in the European Union due to the Treaty of Lisbon? I know that that's a very technical issue, but the new role for the European Parliament, and also the willingness of the European Commission to reinforce, if I may, its key position in the negotiation process. Don't you think that this also affected positively to the saliency of this new trade policy? Because at the end of the day, the European Parliament is expected to be the EU-wide institution willing to hear directly from citizens. So it was a new window of opportunity for this institution. At least this is my reading. What do you think about that?
This is a very good point. There is some debate on whether the European Parliament became an actor in the politicization process as a result of the pressure from the success of the CEOs in having mobilization of the public. And this is why they force the European Parliament to have a greater role, more than the changes in Lisbon. But of course, the changes in Lisbon also help the European Parliament then to have a role with the CSO's pressure. So yes, there has been quite a lot written on the role of the European Parliament, and to a certain extent, as a channel for the politicization. So let's remember exactly what politicization means. Politicization means that contestation, yes, that is present almost always, yes, around policies. You always have somebody who wants to change something about a policy. So you have always contestation. But this contestation is usually from a minority. When this minority that is contesting is able to gather the attention of more actors, and by doing so, creating a debate, because you have a polarization of the debate between two positions, then you have a salience and you need to do something about it. All right, and this is the politicization. So for politicization, is when the contestation becomes to a certain extent wider in terms of actors. And this is what happened around the TTIP. At the beginning, the European Parliament was in favor. But when you had the success of the CSO's campaigns, is when especially the left the parties on the left began to take the flag of the CSOs and to press the Commission and the Council to change things and to ensure that the European Union standards and requirements were not going to be affected, and that there was going to be more transparency. Yes, apart from all the these debates regarding the investment court and investment provisions. Yes, so yes, absolutely. The European Parliament was one of the actors that was brought into the politicization process and that channeled and enlarged the politicization, the salience of the debate. Absolutely, yes, very good point.
Good. Just trying to move on a little bit and trying to bring together some of the elements you already shared with us, Patricia. You actually mentioned a couple of very interesting elements that I'd like now to put together. One thing is this rise of new actors, new voices, these civil society voices in the European political landscape due to the enlargement towards, I mean, first of all, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and then the enlargement towards Central and Eastern European nations, and so on and so forth. This is one thing. Another concept that recurrently appeared in your comments so far is this idea of polarization, right? I'm trying to see those elements in the perspective of how the civil society reads the trade policy. I have the feeling that, unfortunately, many times this trade policy become the boxing buck of many political voices and voices in the political opposition. Okay, do you think that we may establish a kind of relationship, a kind of link between these critical voices towards the European Union as such, is this Euroscepticism from let's put it that way, in a very and I am aware that I'm oversimplifying things, but these populist voices, the connection between this and the reaction against trade policy, I mean, to my understanding, these voices could be taking the part instead of the whole. Why the trade policy become so evident target for many?
It's interesting because this has been one of the things that we have studied, whether the contestation of CSOs during TTIP and the ratification of CETA had to do with the populist movements. And our results indicate that this is not the case, and not just our results, but the results of other literature have been reading. In what sense? The contestation around TTIP and the ratification of CETA was especially from the left, and was based on not on protectionism, but on preservation of the status quo, which is different. So what they wanted was to preserve the values, standards, requirements of the European Union, not to, probably there will not have been any such a contestation or such a movement if the agreement with the US will have been based on tariffs. No problem with tariff. All the Eurobarometers indicate that even during the politicization of European Union trade policy, consistently, the population of Europe was pro-free trade. But when I mean pro-free trade is with majorities of 70 and 80%. So it was not a contestation of free trade per se, of the norm of free trade, but of having an agreement on issues with the US, which has a strong bargaining power on issues that had to do with our values, our standards. But after 2016, if I remember well, it is when the speeches of the DG Commissioner start referring to a new kind of contestation. And the Commissioner distinguishes between them just in one speech, but it was very interesting. In the sense that one thing is the CSOs asking for more transparency and the preservation of the status quo, the preservation of our values and standards. And another thing is voices asking to preserve our jobs, to close the European Union from the rest of the world, to have European Union first. Let's put it like that. No, American first or European Union first. Those are different type of contestation. And curiously, the second one has not gathered the same manifestation. You haven't had the same mass mobilization on the streets for that. You have had a race in the populism, in populist parties' votes, but those have been basically on the right and extreme right, and their main focus has not really been trade, but immigration. So it's funny. This may be due to the fact that, of course, the European Union is more depending on trade than others. So we need trade. But apart from that, I also believe it's because they were not going to get the votes against trade. The same as they have realized, those populist parties have realized that asking for a Brexit or an exit, like the UK, was not going to give them the votes that they needed. And this is why all of them now, they talk about different European Union or different Eurozone, but they do not talk about leaving the Eurozone or leaving the European Union. That has changed in their syllabuses, but in the programs. But the focus was on immigration. They wanted to close the European Union to immigration. So I don't know if I have answered your question, but
yeah, fully. Actually, I was thinking that perhaps these anti-trade or anti-free trade concerns were more related to other populist voices. This "Make America Great Again," perhaps,
yes,
was the movement behind this "Make America Great Again" reacted quickly or more intensively to this idea of regaining our jobs and trying to reshore what had been offshore previously, right?
Yes.
But yeah, I like this. I do understand this distinction you are clearly making, right, between the concerns among immigration and the concerns about trade. Patricia, we're talking about around about the 15 to 20 years period, right? This increasing politicization of the EU trade policy, and out of the blue, in this process, in this historical process, out of the blue, we observe the unexpected happening. We have this outbreak of a world pandemic,
Yes.
which completely changes our understanding of, if I may, global politics, but more specifically global trade, because during the month of March, April, and yeah, at least March and April 2020, global exchanges of goods and services to a lesser extent were, completely full. And now we're trying to recover from this still ongoing crisis. How do you think that this COVID pandemic will be affecting the EU trade strategy in the midterm and in the long term. And of course, in this repoliticization or politicization again of this EU trade policy.
I believe that if the European Union trade policy has something, is resilience. Something that the European Union wants is that this policy already has, is resilience. Let me ask our students something.
I promise that I'm still there.
Hopefully, and they are still awake, which is a second question, yes. Let me ask you something. Have you had any problem in buying food at the supermarket last year during the lockdown, when we were all locked down? Did you have any problems to get food at the supermarket? If somebody had a problem, please raise the hand. If nobody raises the hand, I understand that you did not. Oh, sorry, there is. Depending on the product, only toilet paper, not food but toilet paper, we didn't. Interesting. The first reaction when we have fear, yes, is either to run or to protect ourselves. Exactly. At first, some kind of products work exactly. In the UK, it was not toilet paper, it was alcohol. Mark, I don't know how to interpret that, because of course the toilet paper is because everybody believes that is basic. Perhaps in the UK they believe is alcohol. That's okay. Let's not enter into this discussion, but it's a good point. Yes. The thing here is that when you are attacked, you tend to think me, my family first. All right, and it's the same with the state. So the first reaction was to close borders, and even to take to close border not only in front of the rest, but also between European Union countries. So it's not just global trade that was negatively affected, but also the intra-European Union trade. It was a disaster. Yes, and in some cases, I remember one that I believe it was the French that took, I don't know if it was a trailer or what, but some medical gear that was going from one country to the other. They stopped it and they took it. Yes, it was, I don't know if it was mask or what it was. So between European Union countries. So that was the first reaction. Hopefully, or thankfully, this time the Commission reacted and was able to convince the states to open up between them, at least for trade, yes. But in exchange, what happened is that the European Union as a whole closed up in front of the rest. And only progressively they started to open up. Trade has regained the same level as before, despite the pandemic continuing. So it has been resilient. And something that we have learned is that closing up ourselves is not a solution. That we need globalization to have all the supermarkets full of goods because of global value change. And if something has been proving during this pandemic is that despite everything, the companies have been able to adapt and to maintain the minimum global value change to ensure that at least from the food perspective, we were served, but also from other perspectives. So it has been, for some pro-trade, they have been publishing a lot of evidence showing how, to a certain extent, if something has been proven by COVID or by the pandemic, is that globalization is very resilient. That we have been able to find ways to keep the economy working. Yes? Yes, Mireia. Yes, that's a very good point. Exactly. So what should we do? At the beginning, of course, as we were saying, the first reaction was to close ourselves. And still, there is this idea that we cannot depend so much regarding at least medical products from abroad. So, as Mireia was asking, it seems to lead towards, okay, we need to be self-sufficient, we need to make an effort, at least for medical products. The problem is that we cannot, because to put it, we are already self-sufficient in most medical products. 80% of our medical products are produced in the European Union. It's just the 20%, and this 20% that is not produced in the European Union is produced in other parts because we need input that comes from other parts. So it's not a solution. And this is what those studies I was talking to you about have been reflecting, putting evidence on. Be careful. Do not promise that self-sufficiency will solve our problems or will be the way to face a new pandemic. This is not the way. What we need is the opposite. What we need is to have more suppliers. What we need is to be able to buy not only from India certain medicines, but also from China and also from Vietnam and also from the US. From the institutional perspective, these two reactions have come. And I was saying that the European Union trade policy is very resilient for that. The first reaction was, okay, we need to protect ourselves, but to protect our single market, let's close ourselves together. So the European Union closed itself in front of the rest of the world. But that was negative, and it was just 1 or 2 months. After that, we opened up and we started to try to say again, the European Union solidarity, we are going to help everybody, etc., etc. During the first part, we had a lot of voices talking about self-sufficiency and what is the new buzzword in the European Union, apart from resilience, which is strategic autonomy. And a strategic autonomy, which comes from the defense area, started to be applied in European Union trade policy. We needed a strategic autonomy. Strategic autonomy may include, of course, having more stockpiles of masks, self-sufficiencies, and also the diversification of suppliers. Everything is can be put inside. But of course, our partners were afraid. What does that mean? Does it mean that you are going to close yourself up? Nadia is saying, but most of the medical devices or products came from China and are distributed through the European Union distribution channel. This is, I will say, a rumor which is not true. Do you think the European Union is going to become subordinate of China's growing bargaining power or will maintain its position within the market? That's a very good point. You have to understand that let me first finish with the open strategy, the strategic autonomy, and then I will try to answer your question because it comes afterwards. But that's a very good question. From strategic autonomy, we have gone to, in trade, open strategic autonomy. It seems a contradiction in terms, but it's not. In what sense it's not? Because what we are saying is we are going to diversify suppliers, we are going to have more stockpiles, and we are going to fight for multilateralism. Because the European Union is the first example of multilateralism, and we want that at global level. We are pro-globalization, we are pro-multilateralism. But be careful. We understand that we are not alone in the world, and that we are interdependent, as you have all of you pointed out. very well. And this affects European Union trade policy. In what sense? That we have realized that both China and the US may be using medicines and others for reasons or for questions that do not have anything to do with trade. That's for geopolitical interest. So the European Union, in this open strategic autonomy, is going to continue pro-multilateralization, continue negotiating the trade agreements it is negotiating, but with more defense measures. So let's put it like that. Even in trade, the European Union will stop being naive, will understand that it needs to defend itself from unfair trade from the other big giants, both from the US and from China. So, exactly, Mireia, you have understood it very well. It is more important to have good coordination to allow the single market to function normally, and to have different suppliers to allow the business to adapt. And they have done it. They have adapted. They have needed 2 months, but they have adapted. Now we no longer have any problem of supply. Do we have any problem of supply of masks, of respirators, etc.? We don't have any problem right now. Why? Because business has adapted. It's not just because China has been able to control better the pandemic and is producing. It's because everybody has adapted. And this is the idea. So we don't want to be protectionists. We want to be pro-multilateralists. But be careful. Within this pro-multilateralism, what we're going to try is to ensure that the rules are for fair game. And therefore, that we don't have Chinese companies subsidized by the Chinese government buying the latest or the more technologically advanced European Union. I have to say that, of course, this is from the perspective of European Union trade policy in a narrow way, but it's also true that when we take a wider look at the reaction to COVID, we have that it's more than the reaction to COVID, I will say, is the reaction to the tension between China and the US and to Trump. We are having everything, all that, the COVID, Trump, China, etc., everything is taking place at the same time as the fourth revolution, industrial revolution. Have you heard about the fourth industrial revolution? And then I will answer Nadia's question. Have you heard about the fourth? It's basically digitalization, all right? And the European Union, and not just the European Union, China and the US, the three of them are trying to position themselves for the new economy, the digital economy, the fourth industrial revolution. And it is in this context that was already taking place before COVID, and that perhaps COVID has accelerated everything, is where we are seeing the most signs of protectionism. In the sense that the European Union is talking about having digital autonomy. What does that mean? So China may have a growing bargaining power because of its position within the digital race. And you have to take into account that to really answer your question, Nadia. Exactly. Exactly. Not depending on third countries. That is what it is being discussed, Marta. What exactly does it mean to have a digital European Union? Does it mean that we can tax the giant techs, the US giant techs and the Chinese giant techs? Is that enough? Do we need to have a European Union cloud? Do we need just to have the European Union regulating consumer rights in the digital era? What do we need? What I hope is that they are able to reach an agreement on that at multilateral level. This is what I hope. So that the European Union will continue to be open up. And that it will reinforce its main asset in digitalization, which is the regulation.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you very much. Tons of very, very interesting insights that will take us long to digest. I'm very glad that you mentioned this EU's effort to reinforce, or actually not to quit the multilateral setting, right? Because it's always complicated to understand that the European Union, on the one hand, announces its commitment to a multilateral global trade governance, and on the other hand, it pursues in concluding bilateral free trade agreements, and we have mentioned lots of them: the TTIP, the CETA, and so on and so forth. But if we stick at the multilateral basis, which is mainly run under the umbrella under the framework of the World Trade Organization, this is a framework, this is an institutional scheme which has suffered a lot. Many tensions and many expectations have disappeared because of the many problems that this international organization has gone through in the last decade. I have the feeling that everyone in Geneva at the World Trade Organization's headquarters were expecting the results of the US presidential elections last year to see what may happen with this central multilateral organization in global trade, right? So, with President Biden in the Oval Desk, do you perceive any potential way out, any potential way to block the many issues that the European Union insists on, and that were kept in a deadlock during years? I mean, I'm thinking of the so famous appellate body, but not only that. I'm also meaning the way the World Trade Organization deals with this digital economy you were just referring to. I think that the European Union wants to bring everyone on board, but at the same time there is kind of reluctance from many other WTO members. So what can we expect in this multilateral setting? What can we expect from the European Union and the others? Thank you.
That's a very good question. And I believe they are also linked with the question of Mark in the chat. Let me try to be clear in my answer. I believe we agree that, or we can agree in that the World Trade Organization is in crisis. Yes, the appellate body and all those issues that were not able to be discussed, like digital, environmental issues, etc. It is in crisis. First, it was the legislative arm, and then afterwards, with the appellate body blockage, the quasi-judicial arm. And Trump arrives, and basically everybody thinks, okay, the World Trade Organization is going to the US is going to leave the World Trade Organization, we are finished, etc. And not only that, but we have a situation where the US has used security interest as an excuse to raise tariffs, and China is using its model of state capitalism to subsidize its companies. And they are the two hegemons. When we talk about what is happening, we are thinking about, okay, this is a race between the US, the present hegemon, and the challenging one, which is China. So where is the European Union? And I believe this is in this geoeconomic context, in a context where trade and economy are used in a fight for the power, for geopolitical power, the European Union becomes or has a greater role than usual. In what sense? In the sense that, of course, the European Union, we know it's a minion regarding military power. And we depend totally, almost totally, on the US. But this is not the case when we talk about economics. Usually when we talk about who are the main players in trade, we talk about the US and China, and then Germany, Japan, etc. But when we look at the European Union as one, and we should look at the European Union as one in trade, it's an exclusive power of the European Union, and we talk with one voice in trade, then the European Union is at the same level as China and the US, or even higher. So when we talk about economics or trade, the European Union is a player, a big player. If the race for hegemony in the world is done through economics, suddenly the European Union is a big player as well. And we have evidence of that. Oh, let me put what I think are evidence of that. Basically, that it has been, before Trump, it was the focus of both the US and China. Obama way of dealing with China was to have the TTIP with the European Union, as well as the TPP with the others. But one was the TTIP, so to have a deeper integration with the European Union, so as to be able, both of them, to set the standards for the world in the new digital, environmental, etc. But of course, for that you need an agreement regarding behind the border, and that was to contest it. All right, even without the arrival of Trump, perhaps we wouldn't have had a TTIP. We don't know. In any case, Obama was courting the European Union. But at the same time that Obama was doing that, Xi Jinping, which had arrived in power at the end of 2012, was also courting the European Union. How? Through the Belt and Road Initiative. So you had that the European Union was a coveted player that both of them wanted. Why? Because if the European Union sides with China, the balance of the world changes. Trump followed the opposite strategy, which was to blow up everything, so that everyone was going to go on alone, and the US was strong enough still to deal with that and to win the war. Let's put it like that. I believe that Biden is going to come back to Obama's strategy of alliances, but instead of trying to sign up hard agreements like the TTIP, he's going to go more for flexible agreements. All right, soft agreements, let's put it like that. And China continues with the Belt and Road Initiative, and has not, but some people believe that one day we will have both China and the US within the TPP, today's CETPP, all right? I don't know. But what is clear is that the role of the European Union today is very important because of that, because of its economic power, its market power, let's put it like that. And because the context is using economics for wars, yes, or to determine the hegemony. And which is the position of the European Union? The position of the European Union is not to get married either with one or the other, but to promote multilateralism. And the European Union is quite, I had the pleasure to work with the person in charge of the European Union strategy in the World Trade Organization, who is in Spanish, a Spaniard, sorry, and he explained to me something that I found very positive, and perhaps you will also find it very positive, which is that something good has come from Trump, is that China understands that the status quo in the World Trade Organization is no longer possible. If this is true, and China has signed this investment agreement with the European Union, plus the phase one with the US, it is possible to reach an agreement on subsidies and on public companies at the World Trade Organization level, and that will be fantastic, because that will be the best scenario. The worst scenario will be a world split between two blocks, the Western bloc and the Asian bloc, and or the pro-China and the pro-Western, the pro-US, and that will be a disaster. Sarah was talking about the spaghetti ball metaphor. That's a very good point. Yes. I have to tell you, Sarah, that something that perhaps doesn't come up very often when we talk about the spaghetti ball is that when the European Union decided to enter the spaghetti ball, and today it is the entity with more bilateral agreements and regional agreements of the world, it did it always sustaining, claiming that it was not going against multilateralism. And this claim was based on the following logic. What we are negotiating with those countries are deep integration agreements. We are not just looking at removing tariffs and quotas. We are also looking at behind the border, and behind the borders and topics that have not yet been covered in the World Trade Organization because of the Doha round, disaster, etc. So what the European Union has always claimed is that by making those agreements, deep integration, it was preparing the world for a new multilateral agreement. So that those bilateral agreements should be understood as stepping stones towards a multilateral agreement, not as blocking stones. There has been debate on whether this is true or not, but that was the claim of the European Union. Very pro-multilateral. So the European Union has a role, yes, a big role to play. Thank you.
So true, Patricia. I very much agree. I was thinking that perhaps it's not the best metaphor possible or the best image possible, but I was thinking that there is no more stable stool than the stool that has only three legs, right?
Yes, you are right.
I always remember a chair, a wooden chair in my grandmother's kitchen that had, of course, 4 stools, and there was always one stool shorter than the
Yes.
others. And this chair was the most uncomfortable chair possible. So, and a stool, and of course I'm meaning a wall system, right? Based on
Yes.
this triangulation, these 3 big legs interacting each other on a recurrent basis. It's a very, very stable possibility. It's a very, very desirable possibility, at least more. And I agree with you, more desirable than one bipolar world. Again, one bipolar world. I'm afraid, Patricia, that we are running our time, and I thank you very much for your long and very, very comprehensive answers. So, but before, if you are still in the mood, and before leaving the session, I'd like to open the floor to our audience today. Many questions have already been asked through the chat, but perhaps there is still any further issue, any additional question that any of our members in the audience want to ask you directly. So if you haven't, guys, if you haven't time or the opportunity, the right spot to ask your questions, this is your time now. Don't be shy. If not, one very last second, no. I mean, we covered plenty of.
Well, they have asked very interesting questions.
They have been.
Oh yes.
There is one final.
Sarah, following your previous argument, Patricia, if it was not populism that made people take the street, which other factors it influences anti-TTI apart from the CSOs? The fact that they did not want a neoliberal system. When you have a deep integration agreement with a country that you believe has more bargaining power than you, you are afraid that you will basically become the US. So that Europe could become a part of the US, controlled by the US, subservient to the US. The more extremist, I even read somebody who said that the TTIP was the first step towards having guns in the streets in the European Union. Yes, so the fear was that if we had an agreement with the US that extended to a certain extent, the internal market towards the US, that will mean that we will have to negotiate our standards, our requirements, exigent requirements with the US, and that the US, because it is controlled by its multinationals, will never agree with our standards. They will prefer lower standards, and that at the end of the day, therefore, what we were going to have is an economy within the European Union controlled by the multinationals, and the US multinationals at the top of that. So that having the TTIP with the US was going to mean having a neoliberal system. That was the main fear. And that fear had to do with the fact that when we negotiate a deep integration agreement, we are not just talking about removing tariffs, but also about regulatory elements regarding the norms, the regulations, the standards, the rules, the different products and services should comply before entering one market or another. Yes? I hope I have answered your question, Sarah.
Excellent. Okay, Patricia, I think we're done. And we thank you very, very much for sharing with us your extreme.
I don't hear you.
Non sentim.
Of course not,
No.
because I had my mic off. I was just thanking you. You once again, Patricia, for sharing with us this incredibly wide perspective and very, very interesting thoughts on the EU trade policy and how the EU interacts with the rest of the world through trade. So again, thank you very much for accepting to be with us today.
It has been my pleasure, and it's not every day that I have the pleasure to talk with people so well informed in the audience with so many good questions. So thank you so much, and good luck to all of you. Huh? Very well.
The same to you.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.